We will call to order the Land Use Advisory Committee meeting for March 20th. All right, before we get started, I did want to do the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement. The Metropolitan Council acknowledges that the land we currently call Minnesota, and specifically the 7-county region, is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota Oyate, who are present and active contributors to our thriving region. As part of the Metropolitan Council's commitment to address the unresolved legacy of genocide, disposition, and settler colonialism, and the fact that the government institutions, including the Metropolitan Council, benefited economically, politically, and institutionally after the forcible removal of the Dakota Oyate. The Metropolitan Council is dedicated to instilling land, water, and people commitments in the regional policy. These commitments support the Dakota Oyate, the 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, Ho-Chunk Nation, and the American Indian communities representing over 150 diverse tribal nations that call the 7-county region home. We currently have the agenda. Everyone's okay with the current agenda that we have? Thank you. And have distributed the January 16th, 2025 Land Use Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Looking for a motion and a second to approve those.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second, any discussion? None? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, we'll get started with our first information item, the decennial system statements with Amber Turnquist.
Good afternoon. My name is Amber Turnquist. I'm a senior planner and sector rep in local planning assistance, presenting today on the decennial system statement. Since this is my first time presenting to you, I wanted to take the opportunity to briefly introduce myself. I joined the council in June of 2024, and I've been a planner in rural and urban areas in North Dakota, Minnesota, and Maryland. On the agenda today, we will talk about system statements, what they contain, how we get to a final system statement, what happens if there's a dispute, and BLUAC's role in that process, along with the timeline and next steps. As you know, we are always somewhere in the regional planning cycle. When census results are released, the council prepares the regional development guide. Imagine 2050 was adopted in February, along with the regional system statements and policies that set the long-range policy foundation for housing, regional parks, trails, transportation, and water. This means we move from policy and system planning to the 4th stage, issuing system statements. After which, the council develops guides, trainings to assist communities as they prepare for local comprehensive plan updates, and then local plan implementation, subsequent plan amendments, and the cycle then begins again. After adoption of the Regional Development Guide, the Metropolitan Land Planning Act requires that the Met Council provide local governments with a system statement. System statements contain information from the Regional Development Guide and are individualized reports that inform communities on key changes to the regional plan, forecasted growth, development expectations, and considerations affecting them. This document is used by the communities to review their comprehensive plans and prepare updates. They also serve as a reminder to the communities that comprehensive plans need to be ready in 3 years. System statements will be distributed in September of 2025. The system statements provide communities with their community designations, forecasted growth, and as applicable, affordable housing allocation numbers, highways, transit routes and facilities, aviation information, metropolitan sewer service, subsurface treatment systems, surface water, and regional parks and regional trails. Imagine 2050 contains systems and policy plans. System statements inform communities about the changes between 2040 and 2050 development guides, generally, and information relevant to them specifically. The Local Planning Handbook provides tools, maps, and resources to update their local plans. If there are no concerns with the system statements, it is considered final 60 days after issuance. Concerns with the statements are typically resolved through discussions between local governments and their sector representatives. The reconciliation procedure, if an agreement cannot be reached, is that the community submits a resolution requesting a hearing within 60 days of receipt. That resolution must describe the disagreement and propose specific amendments. The dispute procedure is as follows: discussing with the sector rep, requesting a hearing within 60 days, and LUAC, or the Office of Administrative Hearing, holds a hearing within 60 days of the request. A report is then transmitted to the council, which makes a final determination based on that report. So the role of LUAC is to hold a hearing within 60 days of a request. This is an opportunity for interested persons to testify and present evidence. The body may consider the need for or reasonableness of system plans. This represents a change from the previous cycle, as the statute was revised in 2018 to allow for the consideration of reasonableness. Within 30 days, LUAC sends the information report to the council, which makes a determination based on that report. The council makes a determination within 30 days of receipt and any proposed amendments. System statements will be distributed in September of 2025, as I previously said, and by December of 2025, statements are considered final if a request for a hearing is not received. If there is a hearing, reports are submitted to the council by January 2026. And by December 31st of 2028, local governments will have completed their comprehensive plans. And I then get to come back in September to present to you again as a reminder and go into detail a little bit more on the procedure and dispute procedure. I am available if you have any questions.
Has LUAC ever did this before, hold hearings?
Yes, they
They
have.
have, not for a long time to look at, right?
But during the cycle, this is the process.
Okay.
Chair?
Good.
Right, thank you, Chair. Amber, thanks for the presentation. I know that several of us have been on this board for several years. To my knowledge, and you can correct me, Sandy and Angela, I do believe that there was only one time that we've had possibly one of these come to the forefront. I think that was with Oak Grove, I believe, and that got resolved before it came to us. So I know since I've been on the board for 14 years, I've never been associated with having to go to that level. So I think it's a credit to you and the staff for being able to work through the issues with the local communities and getting these things ironed out before they get to this level. So kudos to you, and just keep doing the good work that you do.
Chair, if I could. Just, Chair, if I could, just one thing to add to what Member Klein was saying as it relates to Oak Grove. So with any dispute, the community can choose whether or not they want to bring their dispute through the LUAC committee, or they can go through the Office of Administrative Hearings. And with Oak Grove's dispute, they did choose to go to the Office of Administrative Hearings. And so there was actually a decision and the results from that. The council adopted a decision, and so there was, that was the most recent one. Oftentimes when we get disputes, they are related to forecast changes, maybe community designations. So, and the Oak Grove one was related to community designations.
Thank you. Go ahead, Joe.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, Angela, can you explain the difference if something came here as opposed to the administrative, whatever you call that, the other?
Sure, Chair and committee members. So the Office of Administrative Hearings, there isn't a change in the process, just where the hearings are held. So the hearing deadline is the same, the report that we have to provide to the Met Council, is the same, so it's the process, it's just who hears the dispute. And local governments may not want to come to a Met Council committee, even though it's a statutorily required committee. And if that's their choice, they can choose to do something that may seem more neutral and go to the Office of Administrative Hearings. There's not a change in the process.
My understanding is the LOAC committee has subpoena power, is that correct? I think I
Chair,
read that
Not to
or
my
somewhere
knowledge.
when I first started.
not to my knowledge, but it depends. I guess if the Office of Administrative Hearings is hearing a dispute, maybe there are some legal things around subpoenas or whatnot, but I don't know.
Oh,
Lisa was actually part of that dispute, so yeah, I don't know about subpoena power before, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. Lisa Barajas, Executive Director, Community Development Division. When a dispute is in front of the committee, like Angela said, it would operate in the same fashion as if it were in front of the Office of Administrative Hearings. 2 cycles ago, so 20 years ago, the Land Use Advisory Committee also was the venue for hearing a dispute from the city of Lake Elmo, and that was after the lawsuit that had gone up to the Supreme Court. There was a disagreement over community designation for the rural or the unsewered portion of their community. And that was heard at the Land Use Advisory Committee. The council supported, essentially ran this committee as if you were administrative hearing office. So we had court reporters, transcriptions taken care of as a part of that, and really prepared the committee for how questioning would work. We also staffed the committee with a separate independent legal counsel, because our legal counsel represents the council. So we needed to have an independent advisor staffing this committee. There are rules that are set around what is required to be submitted as part of the briefing schedule. But in both Office of Administrative Hearings and in the Land Use Advisory case, there isn't a role for subpoena. It's not a criminal case or anything along those lines. It's not discovery, it's administrative law, so it's a little bit different, but still operates under sort of the same structure for briefings and recordings and that type of thing.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Any other questions for Amber? No? Thank you very much, Amber. Next, we're going to have Merritt Klepp, Small Communities Planning Program and Planning Assistance Grant Program Eligibility Criteria Options. Try to say that 3 times fast.
I have to take credit for the title, I apologize.
Yeah, I had a title that was very short, but it wasn't descriptive enough. Thank you for having me today. I was last here in January. My name is Merritt Klepp Smith. I'm a local planning assistance team. And recently, I was named as the new Sector 12 representative. So work with Rosemount and other Sector 12 communities. So glad to be here today. So I'm glad to be back. This continues our conversation from January 17th on the Small Communities Planning Program and Planning Assistance Grants. Today we're going to briefly review what we discussed in January, consider the planning assistance options, review which types of communities are eligible under revised criteria, and discuss options and next steps. So what did we discuss in January? First of all, under Minnesota statutes, reminder that Metropolitan Council can provide grants, loans, and other types of assistance to support communities to update their comprehensive plans. And providing this assistance is based on a recipient's demonstrated need and available financial resources. It is up to the Met Council to determine how we assess demonstrated need. The Council's Planning Assistance Fund has been used to provide grants to eligible communities in previous comprehensive planning rounds to assist them with their updates. This table, which I shared in January, shows the funding categories and communities served during 2030 and 2040 rounds. The rows show the types of communities served, and the columns show the number of grants and funding levels for the 2030 and 2040 cycles. During the Regional Development Framework 2030, 50 local communities were eligible for grants, and during Thrive MSP 2040, 70 communities were eligible for grants. The criteria used to determine eligibility for the 2030 and 2040 planning cycles were net tax capacity of a community compared to the region's median net tax capacity. In 2030, this was tax capacity for the community as a whole, and in 2040, the criteria was changed to net tax capacity per capita for a community. Another criteria used has been the 30-year population growth rate of a community compared to the metro median growth rate, current population, and then the final criteria is a county or consortium approach, whereby a county or coalition working collaboratively with 5 or more communities can advance their comprehensive plannings as a group. Reminder that the counties eligible are Scott and Carver counties, which still have land use planning authority for their townships. This table is one that I shared at our January meeting, and it's packed with information and a little hard to read. So I'll just quickly remind you what's here in the table. The first 3 columns show eligibility criteria that we just discussed. And the last column on the right shows the number of communities that are eligible under these criteria. The rows show the sets of criteria used to determine eligibility during Thrive 2040. These rows are shown in gray and white. And then eligibility for options under Imagine 2050 are shown in white and yellow rows. The blue rows show eligibility under the new Small Communities program. Under the 2040 options and in the 2050 options presented to LUAC in January, there was overlap in the eligibility. So some communities were eligible under multiple criteria options. For example, in the 2 gray rows at the top, you see 43 eligible under general criteria and 35 under small cities. But because of the overlap, the combined total of eligible communities was only 67. The 2050 options that are shown in yellow, as well as small communities, also had overlap when we looked at them in January. The problem is that overlap is hard for anticipating how many communities are gonna participate in receiving grants for the Small Communities program. So if half of the communities, for instance, in the Small Communities program are also eligible for grants, and they're choosing one or the other, it's hard, we won't end up using all of our grant or program resources. So one of the goals I had for this time around was to tweak the criteria to remove overlap and eligibility. In January, we talked about the Small Communities program, and there seemed to be very strong support for that. Again, the goal is providing technical assistance to the region's smallest communities by bringing their comprehensive plan updates in-house to the Met Council, that we would bring some temporary staff on board to work on those plans, as well as hiring engineering consulting services for the more technical elements. And it's our goal to serve 20 to 30 communities with this program. So after we had a good discussion in January, you asked me to do kind of a deeper analysis of which types of communities would be served under the eligibility criteria for grants and small communities. So there were 3 elements of the analysis I did between January and today's meeting. First is who needs help. How do we determine which communities need the most help? I posed this question to my colleagues and some planning consultants who've worked with many types of communities during the 2040 planning update cycle, and their answers were quite consistent. They identified population and financial capacity as the biggest determinants of need. Population is key because the larger a community is, the more planning and engineering staff it has. Staff that can do much of the comprehensive planning work themselves or manage consultants. Financial capacity is the amount of money that a community has available to hire staff or consultants for the work. There are some very small communities that are quite wealthy, so although they lack staff, they are seen as having the financial ability to hire consultants. The second piece of the analysis was considering how to simplify the options. So I tweaked the criteria to reduce overlap and consolidate the options for simplification and easier review. And the third part of analysis was analytics. So the revised criteria we'll discuss today shift the types of communities served when we compare 2040 grants to the proposed options. The new criteria will provide the same number of grants to 63 communities, but it will serve more small and medium-sized communities and fewer of the larger cities in the region. Also, more slow-growing and older cities would be served because net tax base per capita tends to decline as a community ages. This map shows the communities that receive the 2040 grants. You can see the county and the consortium communities in blue. Carver and Scott counties will continue to receive the grant to serve their townships. And the other blue ones you see are the Dakota County communities that have chosen to do the consortium grant in the past, and they may choose to do so again. They don't all have to participate, but if 5 or more want to come together and participate, that will still be an option for them. Many of the eligible small cities shown on this map in orange will also be eligible in this round, under either the Small Communities Program or the revised grant criteria. The final group you see in green, this eligibility will shift somewhat from larger cities to smaller and medium cities with financial constraints. This compares the planning assistance criteria for the 2040 planning cycle to what's proposed for the 2050 grants and the Small Communities Program. So the first two columns, the orange and the light blue, show the grants for 2040 under the criteria that was used then to propose for 2050. The grant criteria for smaller communities continues to be net tax capacity per capita equal to or less than 125% of metro median. The grant criteria for medium and larger cities continues to be net tax capacity per capita equal to or less than 100%, but it no longer uses the 30-year growth rate criteria under the 2050 proposal, and instead focuses on cities with a population under 35,000. If we look at the column on the right, the darker blue, the Small Communities Program, the criteria are very similar to what we discussed in January. Only communities under a population of 2,500 will be eligible, and the net tax capacity per capita scales up slightly as the community size decreases. This stepped approach in net tax capacity recognizes that the overall budget of a community shrinks with the tax base, even if the tax base per capita is a bit higher than a larger community. So this table is a revised and somewhat simplified version of the earlier one. It shows that under the 2040 planning grant criteria, there would be 63 communities eligible. Under the revised criteria we're discussing today, there would also be 63 communities eligible. And in both cases, at least 2 communities and possibly more would do the county or consortium approach. For the small communities program, 30 communities would be eligible. And again, at this point, as revised, there is no overlap between the grant and small communities opportunities. The next 4 slides compare the types of communities served under the 2040 grant criteria, which are shown in orange or peach color on these slides, and the 2050 grant criteria as proposed, shown in light blue, and the 2050 Small Communities Program shown in dark blue. Because 2050, we're looking at coverage of communities combining both grants and small communities program, I've shown that as a stacked bar next to the 2040.
Sorry.
That's okay. We're not in a rush. This slide shows service levels by community designation. So the same or more communities would get assistance across all designations in 2050 with a significant improvement in service to agricultural, rural residential, and urban edge communities. Here we see assistance based on current population. Service significantly improves to communities with populations under 500 and those with populations between 5,000 and 25,000. Communities with a population over 35,000 would no longer be eligible for grants. Looking at net tax capacity per capita, more communities are eligible in 2025 across all of these categories, except for those with a net tax capacity per capita over 175,000, where there would be no eligible communities. You can see that the Small Communities Program serves the higher net tax capacity per capita communities than 2040, with the rationale again being that in those extremely small communities, a higher net tax capacity per capita still leaves them with a small enough budget that they can be challenged to do their comp plan updates. And finally, we look at how communities are served based on their 30-year growth rate. So as I mentioned, the proposed criteria for 2050 would no longer consider growth rate as a criteria. Therefore, more communities with low growth rates, as you see on the left, become eligible. These are typically urban, urban edge, and some suburban communities that are aging and fiscally constrained. But nevertheless, you can see that the service to high growth rate communities declines only slightly and actually increases in the highest growth category for communities that exceed 35% population growth over 30 years. So with that, I'm going to open it up to discussion and next steps. We have a few questions we can consider for our discussion.
Chair, well, my opinion hasn't changed. I think our last meeting, I said grant money should be given to those who need it, not to those who want it. Speaking for Carver County, I'm no expert on most things, but I think cities like Chanhassen and Chaska, Victoria, just because the Met Council is budgeted to spend this money, that doesn't mean they have to spend it. You know, they could find some other low-income housing or something to spend the extra on. Mm-hmm. So I think some of these cities could very well pay for it themselves. But I think grant money should be reserved for the communities or cities that really do need it. So my opinion hasn't changed really.
Okay.
Bill?
Thank you. And my opinion's just the opposite there. Generally speaking, the money is taxed from those communities. And especially with pressure, inflationary pressure out there, it's a good way to spend the money, and I'd say it buys more goodwill from the Met Council out to those communities than anything else.
Chair,
Go ahead, Phil.
thank you. I have to agree to some degree with Commissioner Bill. I know that the last conversation we had when I was here is I really wanted to see this more grants to go to more communities as much as possible. I think you've achieved that for the most part. It is nice to have it just, I won't say it's nice, but to your point, you know, the communities that can afford to do it, they can do it themselves, but when we pay our taxes, we want to make certain that we get some of those tax dollars back. And to Bill's point, he's correct in my opinion that at least is showing that the Met Council is being trying to get some equality across all these communities and give them at least an opportunity to get some of their money back. I mean, to me, that makes a lot of sense. I have a question as far as, do you have any idea, what are we looking at for total grant dollars initially here? Has that been decided? Does this legislature still have to put that together yet, or where does that stand?
Chair, so we are working on a budget internally. The legislature doesn't fund this program, the Met Council does. We do generally have, the fund is maintained every decade, and so we generally have some money left over that we work to generate interest over time. We're working to pull some additional funding together so that we can at least maintain the level of grant funds that we had in the last round, taking into consideration the changes in interest over time.
Okay, yeah,
It
Chair.
was
Information.
1.898 last.
Inflation,
Well, so,
sorry.
yeah, I know it was a little over $1 million last time, so.
It was like 1.9 last
Yeah.
time.
1.9.
Yeah, close
Yeah.
to.
The other thing is too, is on these criteria, when we start sitting down with the individual communities and we start looking at what's needed to be done, can some of this be, I would say consolidated, or does some of this pertain to, can some of it be excluded as opposed, like, for example, there's some new stuff going in, it's like there's emissions that have to be considered this year. You know, the density is kind of an issue. What are some things, is there some things within the requirements that they're not overlapping, that they could be maybe done away with? I mean, I'm just saying, I don't want to be doing, I don't want to see us do a lot of things that don't need to be done if it doesn't affect that community. That makes sense.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
What we do try to do for all communities is use tools like the local planning handbook and create other forms of technical assistance that help local governments provide, meet every minimum requirement that we can. So we provide maps, we provide tables, we provide data, so local governments don't have to do more than they want to. A lot of time, we do have a set of minimum requirements, but a lot of times local governments have other planning projects that are in process at the same time, small area plans, feasibility studies, some things like that, that they want to wrap into their comp plan. They can certainly do that. There are other plans though that are part of the comprehensive planning process, like the surface water management plan, the water supply plan, and obviously the sewer plan is because of my council, but some of those other plans that are more regulated by others, partner agencies, are part of the comp plan as well, because they feed into the overall. It is a comprehensive plan, right? So we try to help local governments meet all of the minimum requirements. Anything they want to do above and beyond that, we provide technical assistance and support for those things, but it's really, we focus on helping them meet the minimum to the greatest degree we can.
Chair, if I may, thank you, Chair. I know you worked, you and Angela also worked on the Planet book, and which was extremely helpful, that was awesome. I know we were part of that as a committee. One of the things that when I was speaking with our staff at the Hero, one of the things they wanted to make certain that when we do have issues that may come up, that definitely that we support our communities to make it easy for them to complete the plan. That's a big one, that they don't put extra requirements on it in addition to what needs to be done. And to work with them as much as possible. And I'd like to think that we do that now, but you know, in the future, that's one thing that I think we need to do and hopefully try to do. And then other than that, you know, I think that, you know, that's probably all I have, other than this is gonna be costly this year. We're probably looking at almost $250,000 just for our city in Hugo. And I don't know what type of cost that's gonna have with other communities, because that's gonna be, we're gonna have to be doing a lot more investigation, like these emission requirements and some of the other things that are going on. It's gonna be expensive. And these grants, I just don't know how far they're gonna go. So I don't know if there's any leeway that you can provide for some of that. I don't know if the statute requires certain things. I'm not certain where that's at, but just an FYI, the cost.
To Phil's comment, I would like some more information in regards to the requirements specifically geared towards the smaller communities. Because, I mean, if they don't have the money currently to have the staff to plan for these things coming forward, they definitely don't have the money to look into the emissions, look into things that we don't and can't provide them with, because we don't have that capacity. So I would like to look a little bit more into that, specifically geared towards the smaller communities and the communities that are restricted financially to meet a lot of the stuff that we do have for the whole comprehensive plan. Would be greatly appreciated.
Chair, if I can respond. We are planning to come to CDC and Met Council to talk about the kind of whole scope of the technical assistance packages that we have in process. Some are already established programs, but new things that we're developing as well to help local governments with this. We do have a GHG emissions tool, so local governments won't have to do calculations on that themselves. We have a tool ready to go to help with local governments to prepare for some of the new legislatively required climate requirements, for example. Any of the other new requirements, we're also working on other tools around natural systems planning, other things to really help local governments understand different strategies, give examples, for example, provide examples to local governments about the different kinds of strategies that would help achieve specific goals. So local governments can kind of choose your own path as to what they might want to do. But really trying to help them navigate that as easily as possible with as much information as possible. Both Amber and Merritt both shared that they are new sector reps. That's part of how we've been staffing up. We have 3 new sector reps, and that one-on-one technical assistance goes further than almost anything, really helping to clarify, to answer questions, and provide obviously well-trained, experienced planners working with other well-trained, experienced planners navigate a really difficult process. Comprehensive plans, someone in one of our most recent engagements said it's very hard to be an expert at something you only do every 10 years. And so while we are in comprehensive plans all the time, local governments aren't, and we're here to help them navigate that, so as much as we can.
Thank you, Angela. Bill, did you have something?
I was just going to comment, and Angela made it, when you have good sector reps, they're a very good, and I see one sitting in the back of the room here, great resource to mitigate many of the problems. On a side note, we did not do it the last time, unfortunately, but I see this as a great opportunity in the next 2 years to start community-wide meetings with your citizens to educate them on, especially land that will be developed in the next, whether it's the 2030 plan, 40 plan, or this one. Quite often, when you don't take that step, it creates problems on down the road. But it's, again, I'm gonna be sending an email out to cities that I work with, just that, hey, this might be a good 26, 27 thing to do. Because the numbers are coming out September of 2025.
Gerald?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, could the Met Council make sure that the eligible communities get 100% of their funding before you start distributing it to everybody else. That way the ones who really need it get it. Is that possible?
Chair, if I may, I'm sorry, Mayor, that
Yeah,
a
no,
lot of
that's
these
fine.
are related to the grant program. So the way that we have distributed funds in the past is that we, of the total grant dollars that they are eligible for, first of all, it's non-competitive, so if you're eligible for the full amount, period. We have, I don't think, ever had a community not accept the funds, although it's possible. We distribute half of the funds up front, and then half of the funds upon completion of a comprehensive plan that is in conformance with our system plans, consistent with our system policy, or our policy plans, and compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions, which is the statutory requirement, that conformance, consistency, and compatibility. And so we do half up front and half on the back end. The half up front generally allows them to engage a consultant if they need it, or to kickstart their local process if they're expending their money on things like engagement or things.
Thank you, Angela. Any more questions? No.
Mr. Chair, yeah, if I may, I guess, my apologies if I missed this at previous presentations, but is there, like, for Thrive 2040, the 1.9 total disbursement that we talked about, was there a comparison for what was expected versus what was requested and dispersed? And if that, like, I guess I'm wondering how it's budgeted in the Met Council's, expectations for a given plan.
I'll answer what I think I heard, and then if I don't answer your question, just let me know. So is there a plan for disbursement of the dollars, is that right?
I guess how, like, was there a projection? Like, we thought that there would be $2 million and then we hit 1.9, so we were good in terms of.
What was the total budget amount
Yeah,
essentially? Well, we started with a lesser amount of, I don't know, I'm gonna say 1.5 since it's close to 2 million. We started with that and we ran the eligibility criteria and this conversation through all of the committees, and we had a recommendation, and then the council said, we're not sure that you're hitting enough small communities, here's another $500,000, so we added that to the program. So overall, it was about $2 million that we distributed. We distributed most of the money. There were a couple of communities that were a little late in getting their comp plans done, and so they didn't receive the last half of their distribution because the contract does say within a certain amount of time you have to complete your comp plan. It was due in 2018. The council extended it to 2019. I think the grants then were still extended yet another to 2020. And if they didn't have their plans done by then, I think that there was a point that we came to where, we just wouldn't distribute the last half. But that was a very small amount of money. Most of the money was distributed with no problems.
Okay, and then is there an expectation?
And we used the full budget, Jen.
Okay. And then what is the budget for 2050?
Chair and committee members. We don't have that through council just
Okay.
yet. We do have a plan as far as how we are trying to budget for at least what we had in previous cycles. As we get more solid on those numbers and when that might be available in council action to adopt various budgets, I think I would probably be more comfortable sharing the dollar amount. What we are trying to ensure though is that we are having the same amount of grant money available with the consideration of inflation over the last couple of years, so over the last 10 years, I guess I should say. So, and while we do have some money that is held back in the Planning Assistance Grant Fund on a decadal basis, that is really just to keep the fund generating additional money. So while we may have a budget of $2 million, 300,000 of that was held back. So the overall budget was then plus that 300,000.
Okay.
We don't count that as part of the budget, that's just the set aside.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Mayor might have.
Yes, yes. But I I'm hoping today is to hear from you whether you are comfortable with kind of the criteria that have been put forward, what we're finding for those eligibility levels of about 30 communities for the small communities program and 63 for grants. If you'd like me to proceed with those, then I will return in 2 months in May and bring a map that shows which communities then are eligible under these different items. At that time, we would hope for a recommendation that would then be brought to the Community Development Committee, identifying eligible communities for these two types of assistance.
I support what you have in front of us here.
Okay,
Good work.
that's great.
And unless we want to call out Chanhassen, I'm fine with it.
Gerald, yes.
I'll support you on that.
I support Bill, yes. No, I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with it, yeah.
Chair, if I could, Member Rowe submitted a question via email that I'll just kind of read out for the committee's discussion. He said generally that he supports the programs and the revised criteria. He just wanted to ask two questions. For the small cities program, what is the overall number of small cities below 500, 1,000, or 2,500 population in the metro area? We can always come back with that data if we don't have it on.
Yeah,
Okay. For the other question, he wanted to make sure that we're not creating a situation where a few small cities just miss qualifying under the criteria, but would benefit from the program. He recognizes that we want to run a manageable size program for sure, but may also want to make sure we are not arbitrarily excluding some small reasonable number of additional cities by our criteria if small adjustments to the criteria might include them. In other words, we don't, I would think, create a scenario where 30 cities qualify and 5 just miss qualifying while larger numbers are quite clearly outside the criteria range. Seems like if that were the case, and he didn't know if that is the case, we'd want to include the near qualifiers as well if we can. And then he said, as long as we're comfortable, the scenario he expressed concern about above is not the case, then he doesn't have any issues.
I can certainly look at the just miss pool. We also undermine us that the grants are a pretty easy yes for the eligible communities. Whether they choose to participate in the small communities program, it may be that there are a few that for some reason just aren't comfortable being in the program. And I think we want to consider whether then we have sort of maybe a second pool that would be eligible, that would open up eligibility if maybe not everybody does it, or if we just want to stick with our original list and as many that come in, we'll take those. And so that might be a thing to consider as well.
Just for clarification, so when you stamp population, when this goes out this year, is it this year's number? Is it your 2050 number?
What we have been using for this analysis is the 2023 population.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
I think a quick search, we got about 5 cities between 467 and 415. So I think it's only 5 communities that are affected, that are just under the 500 threshold.
Okay.
Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
I expected that to.
Roll right along.
All right, next we got Angela.
Yes. Chair and committee members, we do have a work plan. We're well into March, I know, but we do have a work plan for the year that I just wanted to bring to the table. If there's anything that's not included in the work plan that you were thinking should be on the work plan, I do want you to share that with me. We have been working on the small communities planning program and criteria for eligibility, as well as the planning system grant program criteria for eligibility. We talked about system statement issuance earlier today. We have other plans that are in process, one being the regional economic framework. That plan allows for communities within the 7-county region to be eligible for US Economic Development Authority funds that are available for various programs. I don't know. Grants, availability for any community in the region. If they're not covered by a different regional economic framework within like a county or within their own community. So the region just gives them coverage if they are interested in federal funds. We'll have that come before the committee this year as well, because that is required to be updated every 5 years, and this is the year. We are also looking, as I mentioned earlier, about tools and resources and technical assistance, like the local planning handbook update, the minimum requirements for comprehensive planning, and planning tools like the climate action strategy bank and other things related to the new climate requirements, as well as the natural systems tool that I mentioned. We do have an amendment to the 2050, Imagine 2050 already in the works, really to focus on metrics and measurements. I think it was late last year when Christian Rybaturis, who is one of our research managers, came and talked with us about some early conversations about metrics and measurements on how we're going to measure success and implementation of the 2050 Regional Development Guide. And so some of those conversations will come before this committee this year as well. We have administrative guidelines in order to implement the land use policy. We have updates to the flexible development guidelines, the use and implementation guidelines, the administrative guidelines, and so all of those deal with things related to net density calculations and other things, some of those more technical things that I know are hot topics, and how we would be providing flexibility to local governments as part of that planning process. Some of those will be in next year, but we'll be starting that conversation this year, primarily with the plat monitoring program update, with looking at a shorter look back period. Right now, the program looks back to 2000 or the year that communities entered the program, and the development atmosphere, the market was much different and densities were much different back in 2000 than they are in more recent years. And so a shorter look back period will actually be more reflective of current development trends and would likely address a lot of the concerns around that increase in any of those minimum densities for a lot of communities. Not all communities, but a lot of communities. It's just one way that we're looking at trying to help provide more flexibility. We'll also be starting to kick off the Planet training program. I know some of you have been on the committee for a long time and we're familiar with things like the local planning handbook, but we also did the Planet training program, which really walked through all of the minimum requirements and all of the things you can do to get more out of your plan, from housing to transportation to water to land use and all of the things in between, to help local governments do that planning. Through various events, webinars, we did a conference last time, all with professional credits available, free professional credits available as well, really to get local planners involved. We are also working with the housing policy folks on their implementation tools, and some of the topics that they might bring is some of the land guidance for affordable housing and the Livable Communities Act program updates. Some of that might come before this committee. And then anything that I haven't mentioned, I mean, that we only meet 6 times a year, so that is a lot. Some of this will carry over as we implement the regional development guide over time. But if there are any other conversations or topics that are of particular interest to the committee, we're open to hearing those as well, and we'll coordinate with the relevant technical experts to bring that before the committee too.
Gerald?
I'd like to see some more things about water.
Okay.
I tried to look up information once, who's in charge of water. I believe there's 11 different agencies or something. Seems like a waste of money that, it's too many agencies, there should be one or two or something that are, you know. But I'd like to see more of what the Met Council then is doing when it comes to water issues. Because I believe we need to protect our waters better than what we are now. I think in the future, as our planet warms, water's gonna be more of a valuable commodity. And so parks, lakes in it, and streams and everything, I'd like to see what the Met Council is doing on those issues.
Thank you, Joe.
And other agencies, if you have influence with the DNR, no, I don't think anybody does, but I think kind of on their own, but, you know what I'm saying.
I won't make any comment about our ability to.
Yeah.
The dinner. But in past cycles, we have worked to coordinate more closely with the metropolitan area water. Phil, you might have to help me. MOSAC, Metropolitan Area Water
Metro Area
Advisory
Water,
Committee? Water Advisory Committee.
it's the Metro Area Water Supply Advisory Committee.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Member Klein.
It's a mouthful.
It is. I always call it MOSAC, like everybody else that's involved in it does, and so sometimes pulling the acronym out is difficult. But we have in past years really focused on the interrelationship with land use and water, and we have coordinated with other internal council committees before. So that is definitely something that we could look at and see what are they working on and their agendas and how we could coordinate. We have had joint meetings before, we could do something like that as well. Might take me some time to plan that though, so give me some time.
Well, I won't expect it next week then.
Thank you, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Angela.
Do you want to
Oh, yes, currently, me, Councilmember Wolf, and Angela have been having multiple interviews on a daily basis, I think 4 to 5 a day, to fill the rest of the appointments for the Land Use Advisory Committee. So hopefully by the next one in May, we should have a full committee for the Land Use Advisory Committee. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, we will have the appointments ready, onboarding starting in April. So that way they can get caught up with everything that's happening in the Land Use Advisory Committee. So that way they're prepared coming forward in May.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. Yes, and I know Councilmember Wolf isn't here, but she has been a great asset for it. She was the chair for this for, I think she said 6 years prior. And she was on the Land Use Advisory Committee since she was a council member. So I just wanted to thank Councilmember Wolf for taking the time to sit down with me and have all those interviews, even though she's not present.
And her service on the committee all those
Yes.
years too.
That too. Thank you. Anything else? No? Then this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.